General?
Yes, motion.
And yes?
And yes, and we have some requisitions today.
Yes.
And yes?
And yes. Okay, Mr. Broush is here for a work session relative to amendment to agreement to the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks contract.
Good morning, Commissioner Jones. Good morning, Board. Appreciate the time this morning. We just have one small item on our agenda, and that is the Fifth Amendment to the agreement with Cincinnati Waterworks. The county entered into a contract with Cincinnati Waterworks back in 1995. And part of that agreement talks about wholesale water purchase, but also part of it talks about retail service, where we actually turned over some property, some areas of Warren County for Cincinnati Waterworks to serve. So that boundary area, primarily most of the retail area is along Fields Erdel Road, and it's a small strip, all right. But there's also a portion up near the city of Mason, where there's actually, in Union Township, close to Mason Mara Mill Grove Road, it's actually Cox-Smith Road. We don't have any water service up there in that region of Warren County on the edge of Mason. And so so every once in a while, we'll get a request from customers or from residents up there for water service, and we have to refer them over to the city of Mason and to Cincinnati Waterworks, because Cincinnati Waterworks actually constructed recently a water line down Cox-Smith Road. And so they have access, those residents have access to water, but not from us, from Cincinnati Water. So that's what this amendment is, this Fifth Amendment. It simply turns over a couple of those parcels over to Cincinnati Waterworks to serve. Now, you'll see in the packet today, you'll see that there was probably a waiver or an agreement from City of Mason acknowledging that they're going to provide service, that the Cincinnati Waterworks is going to provide service, because in that area, the City of Mason, I think based off of their agreement with Cincinnati Waterworks, says that if you're going to serve, the City of Mason says if you're going to serve areas that's contiguous to us, that there has to be a pre-annexation agreement. So that's contained in here. City of Mason signed off on this agreement, recognizing that there's probably pre-annexation agreements with these property owners. And so this is simply an amendment that transfers two properties along Cox-Smith Road to Cincinnati Waterworks for service.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm a little surprised that obviously we knew about this agreement for a long time. It was when the county did not have any infrastructure through here. So what we're saying now is that Cincinnati Waterworks is actually actively constructing new lines to serve additional customers inside of the county. So there was no
That wasn't
opportunity.
the purpose of that water line. The purpose of the water line wasn't to take customers away from Warren County. It was actually, I think, for their infrastructure, for them to push water through the city of Mason, they had to go through Union Township, a portion of Union Township. So it was on their infrastructure plan, but it wasn't. It just so happens that, their water line runs through the township. And now, as part of their whole infrastructure plan, it wasn't intended to serve customers. That was the secondary purpose of that water.
Sure, but we had nothing in
We
the
have nothing in that area.
ballpark at all?
No, we're not in that portion of Union Township.
Okay, so what you're really saying is, number one, Mason back in 2001 went off its own well water system and contracted with the Cincinnati Waterworks to do all the water for Mason.
You may have been mayor at that time.
No, I was not, but I'm familiar with it, and it happened before I went on council because I was actually campaigning to go onto Cincinnati Water in my campaign, and then council, at the very end of October, right before the election, did it. So I can't take responsibility for it, but I was very familiar with the issue. Any event, after that, you said something though that I don't remember. So it is the agreement between Cincinnati Waterworks and Mason that if they go out to any contiguous property to Mason, even though it's not in Mason, but any contiguous property that Cincinnati Waterworks has to have, the agreement of Mason to do that, or there's something.
So, yeah, I believe, and I've not read the contract between Mason and Cincinnati Waterworks in a while. I've read a portion of that agreement, but it has been a while. But I believe in that agreement between Mason and Cincinnati Waterworks, Mason requires that any property outside of Mason that is going to be served.
Contiguous.
It may be contiguous or adjacent or in that area around Mason, that, this would not be contiguous. Well, I don't.
Wait, let me back up for I'm gonna tell you.
They require, I just want to say, they require a pre-annexation
Well,
agreement.
that's where I'm getting, because Mason typically does not provide its provision of services, sewer or water services, outside of its
Right.
territory.
It's not contiguous. Those
Without-
properties are not necessarily contiguous. If it's in Union Township outside of Mason.
Right.
And they're not, I'm sorry, I spoke wrong. If they're not contiguous, they require those properties for service to sign a pre-annexation agreement.
How can they do that? If they're not contiguous, they can't annex into Mason.
Pre-annexation.
That's what the pre-annexation agreement is.
So they're just saying, if it becomes
If you
available,
become
then you will.
contiguous,
So they basically got two categories. You're contiguous, we will annex you, period. And if you're not contiguous, then we're gonna have an agreement as soon as we become, if ever, contiguous,
And
then you're gonna annex into it.
Okay, now I
We
understand.
require, it. We require you, then you.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, because I was wondering.
I was
So,
on
no,
council in
I needed to
2020.
clarify that.
Wait, you see, I don't like aggressive annexation. And when I was on Mason, I didn't like Mason going up and aggressively annexing out. If a property owner contiguous wants to annex in Mason, that's a whole different ballgame. But for Mason to go out, or any city, to go out and purposefully buy up and take contiguous property to annex it in, I didn't support that. But on the other hand, this is interesting because you see Cincinnati Waterworks is supplying the water and under contract to Mason. And now they're supplying water outside of Mason, but apparently they have to get permission from Mason to do it. And I'm not opposed to, I don't know what the contract is really, but I take it, I am in favor of people getting water and not being on some
So,
well
that-
system.
That's a good line of thought, Chris, so since we have no contractual relationship with Greater Cincinnati Waterworks, we can't enter into an agreement with them? This has to be billed?
This is the agreement. So we have the agreement with Cincinnati Water.
Okay, so if it's in Union Township, it's not in the city, we have an agreement with Greater Cincinnati Waterworks, theoretically, why do we not allow Waterworks to add these two parcels under directly with Waterworks, and City of Mason has nothing to do with it?
That's what this agreement is. That's what the amendment is.
Then why is there a pre-annexation agreement?
Well, that's because that's the requirement between Mason and.
That's my point. So we do not have a direct relationship.
No, we don't care. I mean.
Well, we do
I
care.
mean, the commissioners, obviously you care, but as far as like,
The
we can't.
contract goes.
Yeah.
No, that's my point. So the contract is a contract between the City of Mason and the Waterworks.
That is one of the contracts, yeah.
So my point is, if we have a contract directly with Waterworks, why is City of Mason,
I'm
which
just-
it's relevant?
I'm just letting you know that they have checked all their boxes Cincinnati Waterworks has checked all their boxes to allow this to happen. Because as
Our
part of-
contract doesn't.
So
say
that's
that.
part of their requirements, is to turn over customers. They have to go back to to City of Mason and check all their boxes off. I'm just saying that they have done that.
So
So
the
it's
City
not
of
our
Mason's
requirement.
contract trumps anything we would have with them.
It doesn't trump,
Separate.
it's a separate contract that Cincinnati Mason, or it's.
Then tell me, how is City of Mason involved in these two parcels?
These two parts, they had to, under Cincinnati Waterworks contract between Cincinnati Waterworks and Mason,
Which means their contract
Their
trumps
contract.
ours.
which it doesn't trump, it just has to satisfy.
happens at the same
Cincinnati
time.
Waterworks has to satisfy the requirements of their other contract before they enter into,
Before they come to us.
before they amend ours.
So,
And I'm
so
saying-
they are the
you can
primary
say-
party. So really, City of Mason has a relationship with Greater Cincinnati Waterworks. We do not have a standalone.
We have, no, not with the City of Mason, we have a standalone with Cincinnati Waterworks.
Then why is City of Mason party to it?
They're not, I mean.
They are.
They have a requirement that Cincinnati.
Who's they?
Cincinnati Waterworks has to go back to City of Mason and get their approval.
Which means that contract overrides ours. It has to.
It's, if that doesn't happen, then this
Then they
amendment
can't
doesn't
come to
happen.
us.
I
It
get that,
happens
but that
first.
means the city's contract trumps our contract.
Well,
We don't
actually,
have to-
actually, all we're doing here today, as far as I understand, and I don't wanna stop your line of question, but I think it'll clarify it. This contract simply says that we are amending our retail water area to include these parcels, which wasn't previously in our area, and therefore, it is now we're permitting water to go into this area that wasn't there before, and now because apparently we have a water service territory, and we are in effect providing that this area now is part of our service territory?
We're releasing customers who are in our service area to Cincinnati.
Okay, so wait a second. So the purpose of this amendment is that this is an area that's our customers, but we can't provide them water because we don't have any facility, any piping near there. And therefore, we're releasing this particular area to allow Cincinnati Waterworks to provide the water there as opposed to us. That's all this does.
All it does.
Has nothing to do with Mason.
We
But
did the
it
exact
does.
same thing in the Fourth Amendment, which was executed in December of 2020.
Okay, so this actually just reinforces exactly, maybe I'm not being very clear. So there are customers, correct?
They are our residents.
Okay,
our residents,
so
potential
now-
customers.
They're in our service area.
They're in our service area.
Okay, so there are customers by contract, or by EPA maps, there are customers. So we can't provide service to them, correct?
That's correct.
So now a third party, Greater Cincinnati Waterworks, has the ability to provide service to our customers, correct?
That's correct.
So we, I am told, have a direct contract with Greater Cincinnati Waterworks to provide service to some of our customers when we cannot, correct?
That's correct.
How is the City of Mason's contract now being interjected into our contract? We do not have a pre-annexation agreement with the City of Cincinnati, I would assume, that any customer we turn over has to sign a pre-annexation agreement. So this is not about these two parcels. I want to be perfectly clear on this, that if there's lots of land in Union Township, there's lots of land theoretically contiguous outside of the immediate bounds of Mason that potentially could fall under this agreement. And so we're saying that even though we have an agreement with Waterworks, that anybody that we release in this territory has to sign a pre-annexation agreement to get water service. That's my question.
We're not requiring that.
So who is?
City Mason is.
What the
So-
frick do they have to do with this contract?
They have a separate contract that requires.
Not with these two
Not
parcels.
with us, with Cincinnati Waterworks.
Which means their contract, so any
You can say
customer
it trumps
we.
our contracts.
So what does that have to do with our contract with this Waterworks? Bruce, you understand what I'm saying here?
I do, and here's the way I would explain it. This is our territory, everybody seems to be in agreement on that. We're not contracting per se, we're releasing it to GCWW so that they can provide it. If they can provide it, they think they can. However, their water supply line comes through Mason. It only comes to Mason because Mason has a contract with GCWW to provide retail water service to the city of Mason. In that contract that got negotiated between Mason and GCWW, GCWW was restricted to say you can't provide water outside Mason unless we consent to it. And in order for them to provide the water to the two customers that we're releasing to them, they have to have Mason's blessing. If you want to describe that as trumping our agreement, and it's really a release as opposed to an agreement, then, okay, I see your point with that. GCWW can't do anything in our territory without Mason consenting to it, and that's all Mason.
Which means we really don't have a direct contract with Waterworks. We have no direct direct contract.
Well, I don't think that's
No,
what's being
we
said
have a
here.
contract with
I
water.
think what's happening here is, and I would explain it a little bit differently than what Bruce said the point, which is if the lines that Greater Cincinnati Water Works are being used through Mason with the lines that were put in or whatever in the infrastructure that Mason's using. So what they're saying is, obviously, if we have a separate contract with Greater Cincinnati Water Works in Deerfield Township or something like that, or in some other area, there are no pre-annexation agreements going on. And if they are extending lines through there, none of this is happening. It's only because Greater Cincinnati Water Works is using lines involved with Mason's contract that they have to do something with Mason. This agreement doesn't say anything about Mason, pre-annexation, or anything like that. It just simply says, Greater Cincinnati Water Works, yes, you may supply water in this territory, and we release it to you to do that.
So Chris, are we serving these two parcels currently?
No,
No, we are not. We have no ability to serve these customers.
Okay,
that's why this is happening.
We have no ability, we have no water lines close by. The only way they can get service is through Cincinnati Water Works.
And the only way in which Cincinnati Water Works is gonna provide them with it is by connecting to the Mason lines, which is why there's a Mason agreement. That's an issue, but it has nothing to do with what we're doing today,
that's
nothing.
right.
Which is what I need to understand. So we have a contract, a direct contract with Waterworks in certain areas, like Fields Erdel.
Yes,
corridor.
we have a water line.
But
We have a grid.
this
That doesn't
particular
matter.
agreement has to go through the city, so that's my whole point. So now, everything that gets released from our territory to Waterworks in whatever area this is that happens to run through Mason, all of those parcels now are gonna be pre-annexed.
If that's what Mason requires.
Yeah, the answer is yes, that there has to be an agreement. Mason doesn't do anything unless it benefits Mason. And they've always been like that, and we see that with annexations all the time. They don't allow anyone to come into Mason unless they sign a type 1 annexation, so Mason gets all the revenue. And Mason's saying the same thing here. There's gotta be a pre-annexation agreement. And apparently, if these are not contiguous, it has to do with a future, once they become contiguous, they have to annex. So yes, we're giving up territory that ends up in the municipal limits of the city of Mason, eventually.
And they can enforce it or not enforce it. You know,
But
it's an
they will.
agreement that they can choose
But they
to-
will as soon as it becomes, again, this is my whole point. So everything I've said has been 100% correct. So their agreement trumps ours because it happens to run through, those lines apparently run through Mason. Therefore, they are germane to this contract. We do not have a separate direct agreement relative to these parcels. It has to go through these lines, which means it includes Mason. My question then related to, is there any way, or is there a discussion with Waterworks that, is this the way it's going to be for every one of these parcels in the future versus, wait a second, we have lots of other agreements, we have lots of other lines, we want these parcels to be served as is because there happens to be a water line
So
right there.
you bring up a great point on that, is our contract with Waterworks expires on December 31st, 2025. All right? We will enter into a new contract with Cincinnati Waterworks after that. All right? And part of that new contract, we can make that a condition, that we can try to force them not to do this pre-annexation agreements for any property that gets transferred to them.
But they won't be able to do that. You know, every time Chris brings one of these to me, I say, how far down Cocksmith Road does this run? Because if you go all the way to the north end, at the corner where Fred Vonderhaar lives, where it intersects Mason Mara Mill Grove Road, those people are on cisterns. You know, they're having water hauled in, you know, if they're not catching enough off the roof from rainfall, and they want water. But then you've got Fred down on the other end, who's a township trustee, and he's never gonna want to annex to the city of Mason, because he's an elected official in unincorporated Union Township. And so either we can somehow extend our facilities, which it doesn't sound like we're anywhere near there to do, or not. Or these people, they're just caught in this.
But why does then, if we have an agreement, we have a county-to-county agreement with Waterworks. And right now, somehow, in that agreement, it somehow includes the interest of the city of Mason. They have some.
Indirectly,
veto-
yes.
Yeah, they have some veto authority, they have some
Correct.
standing. I'm saying, in a future discussion with the waterworks, why in the world are we giving up that? Because again, now we are party, because again, I get it, and again, Fred Bondehar's not gonna be there forever. There's gonna be a new owner to that parcel at some point. That's a pretty good size chunk. So now there's a whole nother subdivision that's going to be forced into 20 years from now, or whatever it is, into the city of Mason?
Well, you see, but it's not, nobody's forcing anything here, because here's what I think is happening. First off, these two property owners want water. If they could get water from us, they'd be happy. But we're nowhere close to doing this, and it's a whole heck of a lot more expensive for us to do it, so we're not doing it. And there is close water that Cincinnati Waterworks is willing to do. Now, so these people, all these people are doing is they're saying this. They're saying, we really want water. Greater Cincinnati Waterworks is willing to do it through the Mason lines, which is the most propitious, most economic, best way to do it. So from a government standpoint, I'm saying, I don't like spending a whole lot of public dollars unnecessarily. But what's the result of this? These people, because of Mason, and I don't agree with this position of Mason, but Mason doesn't, because I think that Mason should be willing to supply water or sewer or something like that if it makes sense to people outside their territory. Okay, particularly sewer, I think that of. But okay, with regard to the water thing, which is Cincinnati's doing it, Mason's not really even spending the money on it, I don't think they should have a problem with that either, but nevertheless, they've got this agreement. So all these people, these two private owners, all they're saying is, okay, we want water, and we'll also agree that if ever we're contiguous with Mason, which they're not right now, and there has to be contiguity to have an annexation. They're saying, we will then, once it becomes available, because there's contiguity, and who knows, there may never be, we will agree to annex in. So they're doing this with their eyes wide open to get water. And I realize that Mason is using its provision of services through its territory as a vehicle to get annexation. And that's just a fact that we don't control. They control it. And I don't know, David, how we enter into arrangements with Cincinnati Waterworks to change this, but my own feeling about all of that is that the most propitious economic provision of public services should be made by the most propitious economic service provider. And
I'm not questioning that. Of course, this is the cheapest way to get service to those two landowners. I haven't said boo about that. My issue then relates to just because Mason has a contract with Waterworks, we're saying we're giving up our right to our customers because the water flows through these lines that have been put in for the benefit of the city of Mason. And now it's being extended at the expense of Waterworks because it ties into the system, you know, we've already talked about. Now, all of a sudden, there's a couple of more of our customers are now eligible for this. Of course, yeah, who wouldn't want water? I get that. My issue has been, so the contract between us and Waterworks really isn't between us and Waterworks. The standing of the city of Mason, as I said before, trumps our contract because now you have to have this provision, even though it's between our customer, us, and the city of Cincinnati Waterworks, even though that's really the only two parties involved here, there is a third party involved, the city of Mason, who says, by the way, since we have a contract, now they have to do this in the future. Maybe it'll never happen, whatever. I am looking into the future because I know these unintended consequences of this parcel here, and a lot of these are large lots.
Well, both things have to be true. They are in our service territory, but we're not serving them as customers. So they aren't customers of ours. They're simply in our service territory for which we don't have the infrastructure to serve them. So since we don't have it, they have gone to the property owners have gone to the city of Mason and to Cincinnati Waterworks, and they have agreed to the conditions around their own private property, and because they want water service. The only thing that I understand that we have to decide is whether or not we want to relinquish these two properties to their service territory so they can be served, because we aren't in a position to serve them. So I'm not going to hold up two property owners.
Again, I haven't said anything about holding up. There's nothing
I'm not
about that.
suggesting you are.
I'm saying in the future, this contract, do we have to abide by this contract that's up in just over a year? Do we have any wiggle room to have a direct contract with Waterworks that actually, if other customers, or other people in our territory that are our customers under the EPA map, if we want to relinquish those parcels, does the city of Mason have to be party to that agreement? That is it's not about holding up service on these two parcels. I am looking into the future of now there's gonna be more and more parcels, now there's another line, and there's gonna be another line. So now all of a sudden and we're gonna keep saying the same thing. We don't have anything in the ballpark. We don't have
I
anything.
know Bruce is about to jump in on this,
So-
because there's not a conflict. I mean, and we cannot trump the Mason contract.
Right, GCWW won't be able to agree to that.
Right.
When we renegotiate in '25, because they have their existing contract with Mason that goes for years and years.
The only
But
way
let-
that
let
can
me-
happen is to amend, for Cincinnati Waterworks and City Mason to amend
Yeah,
that
and
agreement
that's
to
not-
remove that, and they're not gonna do that.
They're not gonna do that, but let me say this, Commissioner Young, if he's anything, he's consistent. And what he's looking at is the big picture. He's gonna go along on two property owners today, that's not the issue. The issue is the big picture. How much territory could we lose if this happens and it continues to happen? And in this area, you have Mason in close proximity already, like at the north end of Coxsmith Road. Across the street from Vonderhaar's is already Mason. At the end of the road is very close to Mason, but Lebanon is
There's
there.
other parcels also, so if you remember, Dan Molina came in to re-annex his property. He owned, it's Marvin's Gardens,
Yeah.
the composting facility. So I think the prior agreement or amendment back in 2020 released him to the city of Mason. So you have that section along State Route 42,
think
south
Chris
of
could-
Bone Road, and you have a couple other properties north. So there are a handful of properties around the city of Mason in Union Township that we can't serve.
And as much as you like to create maps and bring over in PowerPoints, that might be beneficial for the commissioners to see a map that says how much is left. Where does this domino go from here? And I don't think it's a great amount of territory, but everything from these parcels all the way out to the end of the road, those are all large parcels. You can see them from the interstate as you drop down from Kings Island, as you're coming towards Lebanon. That's all that hillside, that's where this is. So, yeah, there are a lot of large
Union
parcels.
Township is affected by this because you're talking about pre-annexation agreements where they potentially could lose property to the city of Mason. And Fred is very aware of this because he's, like you mentioned, he's actually on Coxsmith Road. So they're, and they've seen, property owners there, tying into Cincinnati Waterworks every time we do an amendment.
So I think a question from you to Greater Cincinnati Waterworks about this renewal of this contract, does our contract have to be tied to the city of Mason's? If a line that's served here runs through the city and it was part of their original deal, will Waterworks or GCWW, do they have to then say no, as I used that word before, their contract trumps ours, that anything else has to do that? That has been my point all along in this discussion, and I think that is a question, and maybe the answer is yes, our agreement with Mason trumps anything we do with you. That's why we're here.
Well, here's a better question to put in perspective, David, to understand what's going on here. Because we can ask them that all they want, but they'd have to go back and get an amendment to their contract with Mason to do that. And they could get Mason to agree to that, but I think that's highly unlikely. Even as influential as I may or may not have been, I couldn't get Mason to do this. And I never agreed with these restrictions that Mason's got to annex anything that they provide some service to. But okay, here's the problem. We could have gone and said, we want you to provide water, Cincinnati Water Works, to this area. Please do it. And they said, well, the only way we can do that is using these lines from Mason. Whatever, do it. And they said, well, we can't, because we've got an agreement with Mason that pre-exists this, that says that if we're gonna do that, there's gotta be this this annexation agreement too. And in addition to that, you know, the easiest way to do this is to relinquish the service territory and allow us to do it. I mean, I suppose we could try by saying, we want to contract with you to provide this water through Mason, but that doesn't change the pre-annexation problem.
So I think with the contract, and I'd have to read it, and Bruce, I don't know the last time you read Cincinnati Water Works and the City of Mason's contract. I mean, we're saying pre-annexation agreement. I think we're assuming it's a pre-annexation agreement. They have to provide approval, you know, so the City of Mason has to provide approval to allow them to serve.
Was it
Cincinnati Water
possible?
Works. So, but I think a condition, I mean, we're mentioning pre-annexation agreements, but I think part of that approval from the City of Mason is that they're requiring residents. So, I mean, a lot of this is kind of conjecture. I think the agreement actually, Bruce, calls out that they have to provide approval, since City of Mason has to
Well,
approve
here's the deal.
that. But
I don't believe that the City of Mason will ever provide water or sewer services outside of its territory without its council approval. In other words, I believe that the council of Mason has to approve
Right,
for provision of
absolutely.
services outside their territory. So I think they could do that, but I don't think they will do that.
But I think a condition of the approval in the past traditionally is that they require residents. So, I mean, we're talking about these pre-annexation agreements.
And I get that. And again, my frustration here is, on the sewer, the City of Mason has spent tens of millions of dollars putting in their own infrastructure. And if someone wants to tie into that, well, that's the benefit of living in the city. I get that. This is not their infrastructure. They've entered into a contractual relationship. They just agreed to do this because the county, way back when, did not have the adequate water, or they wanted soft water and not the hard water, or whatever that was. The reason 20 years ago that they entered into that agreement. Waterworks is doing that and building all of that into their fee structure. Again, when I lived in the City of Mason, I wrote my check every month to the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks. That's the way it works.
Well, Mason had a well on Hamilton Road at the end of, Mason.
Their treatment plan is.
Right,
Mason
Mason Montgomery Road,
yes.
butted into Hamilton, and right there was Mason's treatment plant and all that stuff. That was Mason's, that wasn't the county's. And it was a problem because they had problems sometimes with the access to water, if there was a lot of water usage in the summer and the wells could dry up, and so there was reasons for them going on Cincinnati Water Works.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it wasn't because we were providing service, we weren't, the county wasn't. But I think that if there's any way, I think what David is saying is this, and Dave obviously is well capable of expressing this himself. He's saying when we got our contract with Cincinnati Water Works up again, make some inquiry to protect, to the best we can, our townships from having some requirement to annex in automatically to some city because the Cincinnati Water Works is providing water. We don't want our agreements to facilitate that. We want annexation to be separate from that.
We have, our department has drafted that agreement. We have drafted the next agreement with Cincinnati Water Works, because realizing that our agreement expires on December 31st, 2025, we want to be ahead of that. We want to be, presenting to them now, as soon as possible, to enter into this negotiations, because these negotiations will take several years with Cincinnati.
And I think that's an important point, and Commissioner Grossman summed it up very nicely. That is what I've been saying since I first opened my mouth on this issue, is exactly that. And we have water lines that, Warren County water, that run through cities, correct?
We do.
Do we allow the cities then on our infrastructure that we put in to force annexation if they want county water?
No, I think our agreements, I'm trying to think where our water lines cross cities, and it's not,
No, the answer is no. Just because we have water lines that run through a municipality, we don't force our then ongoing customers to sign an annexation agreement with that city, of course not. But here, that's exactly what's happening. So a county provider, happens to be a Hamilton County provider, has a contract with lines that are running through a city, and now any extension to that, the city, and again, and if the answer is no, we've got this agreement and we're only here because of the city of Mason and they control this and we've got a 100-year agreement or whatever that is, the answer is no. But I think from our position, that's really important because those are, under the map, our customers, even though we're not serving them right now. We're releasing them to another provider and we're then facilitating, even though they're agreeing to it because they want water so bad. If they want to annex, it should be a free market choice. So be it. It shouldn't be forced upon them. Oh, you want water, then you got an annex.
it shouldn't be ransom. So they shouldn't be held hostage, or ransomed to tie in, to get water service by pre-annexation. So our agreement, our draft agreement with Cincinnati Waterworks addresses the retail area, this area that we're talking about. So when we can go back and fine tune that so that, we can put conditions in there about pre-annexation. So we can agree to the city approving that because that's under the Cincinnati Waterworks agreement. But I think we can, because, Cincinnati Waterworks, to serve those properties has to get approval from the city of Mason. But we can put conditions in there that approval cannot include pre-annexation. And that potentially could solve it. Yes, you can, but I don't think they'll agree to that. But we can certainly negotiate with Cincinnati Waterworks on
Bruce,
that.
this is a really interesting conversation, and I'm curious about, and I certainly don't expect you to be able to answer this, though I wouldn't be surprised if you could. But it's making me think about the Ohio Revised Code and how the statutory authority that allows a municipality to utilize its contracting powers for utilities, to force this kind of to even allow a pre-annexation agreement to be legal, I suppose, is what I'm really asking. And that seems to me to be an issue worth exploring about whether or not, at the very least, there's arguments all over the place around the issue of annexation, and it's been in the General Assembly, it's an issue of active, reflection in the General Assembly forever. But this seems to be a pretty broad construing of the annexation law, putting this contract, using their contracting authority to force this annexation.
Well, keep in mind, they're not restricted to the same sense that you are.
Right.
Because they have a constitutional grant of police powers, so they have home rule authority, so they can make their own laws. And as far as the annexation laws, townships went to Columbus to change the law in 2001, and they got their hat handed to them, basically. And so townships ended up with some tax revenue, but they still lost their territory. In fact, they made it easier to annex to municipalities. But, if Mason's anything, it's savvy. And it's an interesting point that Commissioner Young raises, because this is not, whether it is or it's not, but his statement was, it's not like they built this infrastructure. GCWW built the infrastructure, and of course the ratepayers are paying for that. But completely different than sewer, where they built their own plant, which is right around the corner from where we're talking about today. So I don't think that there's anything extraordinary about what Mason is doing here, using their position that they're in. A lot of times they put themselves in through annexation to mandate annexation. And ever since I've practiced law in Mason for 32 years, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
They've always required pre-annexation agreements.
I think if you're looking at legislation, I see bills come up every once in a while through the state about draft legislation about outside rates that
Yeah.
customers pay.
Well, and that
So
was-
it's not so much annexation, it's more
But that
what
was
are
my
you
next
charging?
question, is I
outside
know
rates?
that Cincinnati Water Works rates are higher than our rates, and we of course socialize that rate when we have customers, at least from our contract with Waterworks. It just feels to me like, I'm certainly not suggesting wholesale reform of the statute that governs annexation, and I appreciate the home rule, the Constitution that provides the home rule that you can't fight against, but this, I agree with the point that Dave made, that you're highlighting, Bruce, that this isn't infrastructure that the city has invested in itself. It's a contractual arrangement, which seems to me, I guess, tough.
There's a difference.
Well,
There seems to be a difference.
I don't know
anyway.
about the infrastructure point. I mean, obviously Cincinnati gets its water up to Mason somehow through infrastructure it puts in, but once it gets to Mason, it's using a whole bunch of Mason lines that were pre-existing. And so I don't completely understand that. And I don't know, I think we've all kind of really shopped this thing today, and I really appreciate it. But I'd like to make a motion to pass this Fifth Amendment to the Warren County Water area contract.
Second.
Roll, please.
Say it again, sorry.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Grossman?
Yes.
Okay,
But I think you understand what we're putting down.
I do, I understand it.
And
We
again,
have-
I do think, and I appreciate Commissioner Grossman, that there's some water lines that when Mason had its own well or what have you there that were there, but they do not have a water plant. The force main, all the ways of getting the water to the city now utilize some existing pipes, but the water is produced and pumped through the city through another provider. Greater Cincinnati Water Works, versus the city going and investing tens of millions of dollars in a plant themselves. That was kind of my, and we have to recapture you want to, ship your stuff through our plant, then you've got to be a resident. I get that point, but just because now I've got a contractual agreement, and the city of Mason, I have a feeling, paid nothing to expand this water line down Cocksmith Road that helped tie in the safety of the system. But the city of Mason, I would imagine, did not write a check for that. That was Greater Cincinnati Water Works, and it was redundancy or what have you. So that's what I mean by it's not their infrastructure. You go and put in a new line in Clear Creek Township that helps us with redundancy with the North Wells. Greater Cincinnati or Warren County Water is writing that check.
Absolutely.
So that's the difference in my mind.
So I think the amendment, the new agreement that we're going to put forward, I think needs to probably address two things. One is the pre-annexation issues that we're talking about here today. The other concern I have out there that, the board may also share is the rate that these customers, outside the city customers, pay. So, I think that's also something that we will probably have to look at, because the outside city rate charged to these residents can be excessive at times. So we need to not just look at, the protection of our residents because of pre-annexation, but we also need to look at the rates that these customers are paying.
Which would be interesting, tying into Commissioner Jones's point about the ability of a municipality that really has no standing with a township resident is now dictating their rate.
Yes, and that's where, I get back to the state, the legislatures, and every once in a while, you'll see bills out there that try to rein in municipalities from using their outside the city residents as being cash cows for them. by charging them excessive rates. So that's where, when we present this agreement to you, we'll definitely be talking about that and having discussions with Cincinnati Waterworks on this.
Yeah, you'd be interested to know who's setting those rates. Mason maybe had the leverage to negotiate a reasonable agreement, but some of the other communities, for example, South Lebanon, who wasn't in that position, the rates were being set by Cincinnati down in South Lebanon. I mean, these rates were really high.
Oh, 100%, because Waterworks had a federal EPA mandate for billions of dollars where their infrastructure was bad and they got fined and what have you, so they were having to raise rates in Hamilton County significantly, weren't they?
For Cincinnati MSD.
MSD,
MSD,
yeah.
MSD.
Yeah.
Now,
Not the
Cincinnati
Waterworks.
Waterworks is a little bit different.
But to bring that infrastructure out to these communities, like the South Lebanon scenario, those contracts were shocking. And it was Cincinnati that was setting the rates in South Lebanon.
Which is, again, why I don't have a lot of sympathy for South Lebanon when it comes to certain issues, because they had the opportunity. I was here
Right.
and was shocked when they chose to go to a competitor of ours and pay those higher rates. And then they come and ask us for things, and it's like, wait, no, you made this bet.
Absolutely, yeah. They even had a minimum usage penalty in that contract. And they negotiated an amendment to it, but they had a minimum usage
I
penalty.
think I told them at the time, I'm going to remember this, you're making a mistake, and you're basically slapping us in the face, because we have it right there, we have good quality water, it's significantly cheaper, and you're saying no.
So we're 3 years out from the expiration of our agreement. So that's where, our priority is to get this out in front of Cincinnati Waterworks and start those negotiations now, so that when our existing contract expires, we're in good standing. We've got an agreement that we can live with, that Cincinnati Waterworks can live with. And all these issues that you're talking about are worked out prior to that.
At the end of 25?
End of 25, December 31st, 2025 is when our agreement expires. And that's just not the retail agreement. That's also the agreement where we purchase wholesale water. So this is a very important agreement.
Well, I think as part of those, I would probably advise you the same thing we talked about with the MSD portion along Fields Erdel, that is there any possibility for us, with what type of a cost, to take on those customers ourselves? Because I think that was our big leverage when we were talking about the MSD contract was, okay, you're gonna try to stick it to us. We've got a plant right here at Lower Little Miami. We're just gonna reverse some things, put in a couple of lift stations, and we'll do it ourselves. And they play ball with us.
So our agreement is structured, this new agreement is going to be structured a bit different, because it's different than the 95. 95, we needed water from them. We needed wholesale water to serve our customers. At this point, we've completed softening at both of our treatment plants. We're expanding our system, and so our goal is to only use Cincinnati Waterworks on an as-needed basis for wholesale water. So we're trying to dial back the amount of water that we're going to purchase in the future, and to make us more financially healthy. So, this is that whole discussion on Socialville customers, because we're buying essentially $4 million worth of water every year to serve customers in the Socialville area. Our intention is to self-serve those customers.
Right, because we've got one of the best natural aquifers in the Midwest, literally right below us, and now we have a lot of the infrastructure in place to where we could serve our own people.
Yes, so the nature of this agreement moving forward in the future, it will be different than the agreement that we entered into in 95. But all those details, it's going to take a couple years to negotiate this contract. It's going to be a while, so that's
I
where.
just want, from your perspective, I just want you to admit publicly that you went from I was dead wrong and off base to now you agreed with me 100%. Thank you, Chris.
Lord.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Great. Now we'll move to our Investment Advisory Board meeting. Treasurer Wright, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I have a set of PowerPoint slides that Jim McCourt prepared for us that are a little different different approach, and hopefully I won't be so technically challenged that I will be completely unable to use them. Thanks. Jim put the slides together, and.
Going to Jim Spade?
No, Jim McCourt.
Okay, I was
Jim
gonna say,
McCourt
I
is
didn't
our
get
advisor at Meter.
Okay.
He's not going to be with us today because he's in California. For a brief economic update, last year was a lot of things happening, particularly interest rates going up that affected us in the portfolio. But Elizabeth Holmes, Queen Elizabeth, all kinds of things, the markets kind of went nuts. But probably the most important thing for the investment portfolio is the Federal Open Market Committee raised interest rates because to counteract inflation, and it's the fastest rate, the series of rate increases that have been experienced in a very long time. You can see the steepness of the line labeled this cycle. The plot forecasts the rates through into next year, and they're about there. Jim is convinced that the primary drivers of inflation are rent increases and wage increases. Those hopefully have moderated in terms of continuing to increase, but it's my particular belief that we're going to continue to see inflation high for a period of time, even though interest rates have come down a little bit. The yield curve a year ago was the low one. The upper curves basically show that the yields are inverted. This has provided an opportunity for us to sell some short-term investments and invest longer term, which we have done. We picked up some extra yield that way. We've also had things maturing that we've been able to invest at higher yields. The inversion of the curve would indicate that we're close to the end of rate increases, and so we're looking at investing to extend our overall portfolio maturity and lock in the rates that are available farther out for a longer period of time to preserve higher yields for the portfolio. In the portfolio review, this is our maturity distribution at this point. We are well diversified with regard to the type of bonds that we have. We have seen our long end shrink in size. The weighted average maturity is about 2 years. A little over 2 years, and the average yield is up from at the end of 2021. It was 0.86%. At the end of 2022, at 1.72. So basically, a little over doubled the yield on the portfolio.
So what's our current yield?
Our current yield is right at 1.7% average over the whole portfolio.
No, I mean, on like the Star Ohio, like our cash reserves.
Star Ohio is a shade over 4.
Okay, that's what, yeah.
Right now. But.
I knew money market, we should be getting up around
Yes,
4.
This is a chart of projected income for 2022 versus 2023, and you can see that we go from he's showing about 2.4 to 4.6 in investment income yield on the portfolio, 2022 versus what we anticipate for 2023. So we are seeing higher levels of investment income from the portfolio, and we're going to continue to work to try to lock those in going forward.
I mean, we can buy 2-year treasuries right now at what, 460 or something? I mean, which is awesome.
I think they're down. They may be under 4, but yes, it's close to that. We are we're looking to keep the portfolio staggered in maturity so that we're not all come and due at one time. When you do that, in my experience, that you end up with all your money coming back when the yields are low.
Yeah, US Treasuries are at 4.2 right now.
Okay. We're attempting to get more than that with some of the things that we're doing. We bought commercial paper earlier this week for 270 days at over 5. And we're looking longer term. I had an email from Schnepke about a possible PACE deal that would be a longer term deal that if we do we'd be looking at something 4 3/4 to 5 for a 5 to 10 year maturity amortizing type piece of paper. We continue to look in the market for.
Can we go for 10 years?
We can now in municipals. We need to be, we need to be careful about that, but.
I think historically with the Port Authority, Treasurer Wright has been really good with working with the Port Authority. I think we ask him specifically about some things that are 5 to 10 years, and then I think he just comes back and he looks at his spread on his portfolio, and sometimes he's interested, other times he doesn't have the ability to do that, and so we're trying to use more of the port to get into that if we can find bigger yield, and it just depends on how his spread is on his portfolio.
Right, we've got about 11.1 million in those what I classify as special bonds that would be Port Authority and local issues that we've refinanced or financed here directly.
I think sort of interesting, if memory serves me correctly, is sometimes when you talk to Meter, sometimes you look and that's sort of the benefit of the Port Authority going outside of Warren County's walls, is sometimes the treasurer wants more diversity outside of Warren County, sometimes it wants more things in Warren County, so we throw deals at him and let him see if they stick.
I haven't been real excited about lending that money outside Warren County. I've seen that as something we want to primarily do to benefit our own economy here in the county. But we have done some deals outside on those special bonds portfolio. But we are seeing rates go up. We will continue to pursue that on behalf of the county.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Tiffany, do you have anything?
Candace had something that she wanted to bring to your attention, and then I have a couple things for your
Thanks, Mark.
updated items, as well as maybe direction on another item.
Right.
Morning.
Morning.
We received contact from a consultant who is working for Amtrak, and he is asking if the board has an interest in providing a letter of support to, for the state to go out for a potential grant through the Federal Rail Administration.
For what?
I believe that the funding that they would request is gonna go to a research, to see if Amtrak would be viable in Ohio.
I think it's specifically around that 3CD corridor that they're looking for, which would be,
Is it passenger rail?
yeah, it would be from Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, to Cincinnati, and I think the state is interested in basically doing a study to see if it's viable.
Do you have some knowledge on this?
Yeah. It's not something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I would say no. The federal government's broke, and getting more money from the federal government's not really what I want to do.
Thank you. That's all I have.
So one thing I wanted to bring back before you, the question was asked about the additional funding that the federal government has been persistent, I will say, in making sure that we know is available, and that today is the deadline. Commissioner Jones, you asked if this was in addition to the $10 million revenue replacement number that we were allotted under the ARPA limit, and it is an additional $100,000. I'm not sure that that changes the conversation, but it is an additional $100,000, and today is the deadline. They've, once again, been very persistent in reminding me almost daily with phone calls and emails that this additional $100,000 is available. So if you would like me to apply for that or have a change of direction, I can do that.
And if we
But
don't apply
answering
for that, if we don't
it will
apply
be-
for it, it'll be used by somebody else.
That's correct. The majority of Ohio counties that were direct recipients of ARPA dollars are receiving $100,000, $50,000 over each year, or $50,000 in '23 and $50,000 in '24. There are some larger counties nationwide that are receiving a much larger allocation. So, I could understand if it's millions and millions of dollars. Some are receiving $6, $7, $8, $9 million. But the most Ohio counties are receiving are roughly $50,000 each year.
And if we don't take it, it goes to another Ohio county?
They will redistribute it based upon whatever is.
Which is a great argument, but you know what? Our counselor told me today, if I'm anything, I'm consistent. And one of my favorite things ever, sitting in this chair, was when we turned down some of Obama's dirty, filthy money, if you remember that.
It was
on
for
those
transit,
vans
yes.
that were fine, and we didn't want to do it. So we got a check for $46 million, which added to our $31 trillion national debt, and we weren't going to refuse that. It was significant. But now to go and fill out paperwork to just try to get another $100,000 out of the same part of borrowed money that caused our inflation, yada, yada. I'm going to be consistent today, and I have no issue with my colleagues. If you take a different direction, I'm going to pass on this.
Well, given the amount of money, it probably doesn't make much difference. Does it make a difference to the staff whether we do this or not?
Makes
Would
no
you-
difference to me. I mean,
Would
we
make-
still.
Is there something you would want to spend this money on that we could allowed to do that would? permit
It's
us-
revenue replacement, so you're allowed to use it on anything that general government services
Would
can
it-
be provided on.
Would it permit us to do something that would allow us maybe to change how we tax or have rates or whatever that saves our people money? Or is it just gonna be provision of extra?
No, sir, I don't believe it would change how you tax
This would impact the
anybody.
carryover
This would-
to some degree.
Potentially, yes.
So in other words, it would give us money that we could use in the future. It's not gonna change our taxes, it's not gonna change our rates, it's not gonna help our taxpayers or our ratepayers. It would ultimately be used in our county as opposed to other counties. So the only question is, and I don't disagree with Dave Senneman.
Yeah.
He's making a point that says we're sending a message with this. And we're saying, because if we all collectively did this, everybody, it would really be meaningful. But that ain't gonna happen.
Or even if the 100,000 went back to the federal government towards
Yeah,
deficit
right. I
reduction.
agree. I agree. I wish that they would, but they control
I
that.
mean, it's a terrible predicament in that,
I feel like taking off my commissioner hat and going down there and telling you two to take it, because it's like, it's gonna go somewhere else. Why aren't we doing this? But doggone it, it feels
I
good
I
to just
totally
tell them,
understand.
screw you, you're messing this up, take your
I
stupid
just don't
money."
think that they will hear that message.
Oh, I know they
Like,
won't, but it's about us. It's
like,
about making us feel better.
I understand. Listen, I think it's, as you know, I think that's a totally legitimate point of view. It's one that I share.
But it
It's
means that
just,
I'm gonna give the money to
That our
counties
tax-
that are gonna really abuse it, in my opinion.
but our taxpayers also are paying that.
They're paying for it.
But they're paying for it either
Already,
way. So,
already.
so.
Don't listen to Dave Young, take the money.
The point is, here's the counter argument. The counter argument is that our taxpayers right here in this county are the ones paying for it.
Yes.
Now we're telling them, we cannot solve that problem. It's happening. It's forced on us. So either we get to use your money here, or we give it to Hamilton County and Franklin County and Cuyahoga County to misuse your money.
Well, it may not be another Ohio county, I mean, it may, you
Well,
know,
okay, but it's gonna be-
yes, it-
Or
It could be even
California, or New York,
Potentially,
or.
yes.
Okay, so I'll tell you what, I totally agree with Dave's sentiment.
Yes.
But because our taxpayers are already paying for it, and I'd rather we get the benefit of it than some liberal county or something like that, I'll go with, let's take it.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, yeah.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
Commissioner Young?
No.
Commissioner Grossman?
Yes.
Okay. The,
Stop the madness.
Well, we
Once
need
again,
something like
I've-
Dave in the US Senate to
Yeah,
stop
for
this.
sure.
they have put a lot of effort, I would say, in staff salaries from the federal government to ensure that we knew that this money was available. As I've said, probably every day for the last 2 weeks, I've received either a telephone call or an email relative to, and I know Commissioner Jones has received a NACO call.
And other commissioners
And
in
other
the state of
commissioners,
Ohio.
yes.
Well, I think the communication should be, we really wish you guys wouldn't be doing this. We object to it. We're doing it because of the fact that you basically coerce us into this. But this doesn't mean we approve of what's going on.
So, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Cause I'm getting old.
That's me on a regular basis. I will just add a reminder for the cybersecurity training that we're doing for elected officials next Monday. I believe it begins at 10 o'clock. It's about an hour and a half training. We have a consultant that telecommunications has worked with that's going to put on that training. That will be here in this room if you're interested. I know Commissioner Young is coming and will be here, so if you're interested, that's fine. One thing that last week that kind of got by us before we had an opportunity to really talk about it, because we've done it so many different ways over the course of, I mean, I went back to, or Tina actually went back to 2017 and beyond that, our waiving of fees. If you recall, last week you waived conditional use fees and you waived building permit fees for a church that is located, I believe, in Harlan Township or Salem Township, so on the eastern side. And once again, this is something that you've done differently each time. And if you recall, Jerry Sperling came in specifically talking about building fees for political subdivisions, and I think the instance that he brought forward was a school district that were building multiple buildings and waiving permit fees and what that actually looks like in terms of revenue. We do not have anything similar in nature for nonprofits. The church that was brought forward last week, I believe, is interested in building a new church. I think roughly 10,000 square feet, I think that we, closer to 12,000 square feet. We did go ahead and do that, so it may not affect this particular action that the board took last week, but for consideration in the future, we'd like to maybe have a work session. Conditional uses, which you waived, those actually require Board of Zoning Appeal hearings, so the actual board members have to show up. It's roughly $50 a meeting, depending upon how many board members show up, a maximum of 250 plus advertising and those kind of things. Site plan review fees, which those affect the Board of County Commissioners. We have advertising fees. We have your hearing fees. So we've done them many different ways when we waive those fees, but wondered if the board would be interested in having staff prepare maybe more of a kind of an outline on all the different types of fees, maybe some direction or thought versus just considering them individually, or if there are types of fees that you're interested in waiving so that staff knows moving forward. You're not interested in waiving conditional use fees, which require actual Board of Zoning Appeal members to be present and hear something, versus site plan review fees versus zoning fees versus sign fees. You've waived all of those. So we're at kind of a loss, and I think Tina, because we have done them different ways, read it, and we went on last week without much discussion about what that entailed. So as staff, we'd kind of like to understand what you're interested in waiving, or maybe just more discussion at the time the fees are asked to be waived.
Well, I think what I would suggest is perhaps staff put together a memo around what the fees are, what we have done historically, so we can take a look at it and
Okay.
see where the stasis of, where is the kind of pressure points, and then perhaps we can have a more productive conversation by narrowing down on some specific things that we need to talk about. I'd like to see it in writing.
Okay.
If my colleagues are okay with that approach.
Okay. We can get that done.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
that's all that I had.
Bruce, do you have anything? How about you, Tina?
No, ma'am.
I just have one thing I want to share with the board, that I was here last night, and I talked to the gentleman who takes care of, who cleans our offices, and he wanted to thank the board for the changes that we made to our health insurance by providing a really broad list of preventative medications that are covered. It really impacted him in a substantial way, and so I wanted to share it with both of you, that our employees seem to be liking some of the changes that we made to the insurance beginning this year.
And also, apropos to the fact that the Republican Party had a meeting here last night, I had numerous people, whoever designed and redid our room, the colors, et cetera, we had a lot of compliments about it.
Getting rid of the green was a
Yes,
big,
it was a big improvement.
Brought us out of the 90s.
All of that, and so, again,
Good job.
it was a good job. I appreciate what y'all have done, and the public that came here last night noticed that.
We will make sure that Betsy Sammons, who is the Deputy Director of Facilities Management, has taken charge of some of these renovation or I will say updates, not really renovations, but updates, and has been very thoughtful in the process, not only relative to the funds that we've spent, but the value, the value of the updates.
Actually, there'll be one more change,
The
I think they're on
tables.
orders, the tables will be switched out, those are very hard to move.
Extremely heavy.
And they'll
Yes.
mess up the carpet, so I think the new ones will be on wheels, so it'll make like things last night much easier when they wanna move.
For
things around.
our staff that set up multiple times a week and different configurations, so
Sure.
it will be a nice addition.
Great. Anything else, or do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And yes.
Yes.